Greetings, comrades! In this video, I will mostly focus on Ganyu's DPS build. Without much delay, let us get in the video. First of all, let us start with Ganyu's story. Who is she lore-wise? She is the emissary and secretary for the Liyue Qixing. Sorry for butchering the name. Liyue Qixing, translated as the 7 stars of Liyue, are the largest merchants and business leaders who govern the Liyue harbor. Each of them have their own sectors in which they specialize. Qixing and Ningguang are one of the Qixing too, which in turn makes them very important figures for the Liyue harbor and generally in the game too. But back to the topic on hand. Ganyu alone does most of the work for the Qixing as part of her job, which she also likes, even though she always overworks herself. I think this much is enough about her backstory in order to understand who she is. On the gameplay side of the things, she's a cryo archer who has a special ability to charge her arrow up to level 2, which is very important for her role as a DPS character. The other abilities that she has are useful, but technically you can forget about them and you will still do a lot of damage. But in order to bring out her full potential, an attention must be paid to her other skills too. Her elemental skill lets her to leave a lotus flower on a battlefield, which attracts nearby enemies and explodes if it's destroyed or if its duration ends. This is a good way to land headshots on the enemies, since they will mostly stand around the flower doing nothing and occasionally attacking it. Plus, if the skill hits the enemies, 2 elemental particles will be created during the placement of the flower and after it explodes. So 4 in general. Her elemental burst, called Celestial Shower, marks a pretty large field on which the icicles will periodically fall. This field also boosts cryo damage dealt by the active party members, meaning that Ganyu also profits from the field, since her level 2 Frostflake flower deals flat out cryo damage. You will get this as a passive talent when you level her up. Other interesting passive talent is also Undivided Heart, which increases the crit rate of the subsequent Frostflake arrows. I will not talk about her constellation, since in order for her to work as a DPS character, you don't need any of them. Plus, I only have 0 constellation Ganyu, and it would be pretty hard for me to show you any effects by myself. The first talent you have to level up is the first one for the normal attacks, since it also boosts attacks of the charged arrows, which we definitely need. The max level of this talent boosts the Frostflake flower damage up to 394%. Plus, if you have Childe in her party, it might even go till 411%. The other skills you can upgrade till level 4 or 5, anything beyond that will need more time and resources. So upgrade them only after the first talent, or until you will need the weekly boss material, which could become a hassle, since it is dropped randomly from Childe. For the artifacts, you should focus on the crit damage as much as possible. Passively, after every ascension and major level up, she gains bonus crit damage. So stack up as much extra crit damage as possible. The last artifact should definitely be the one with the crit damage as a major stat. The goblet should be the bonus cryo damage, and the Sense of Viance should have an attack percentage in my opinion. For the substats, focus, as I have said, mostly on crit damage and crit rate. If every artifact except the circlet will have at least 7% bonus critical damage and crit rate, it would become perfect. If during the upgrading the crit damage gets the upgrade and goes beyond 10%, then you are the lucky fellow. For the other substats, the attack percentage and flat out attack will also be perfect on her. Some elemental mastery will not hurt also if you put her with Shanling, Sucrose or Fisher. Even though headshots net you guaranteed crit shots, the subsequent crit of the bloom effect depends on your crit rate. That is why a weapon with a crit rate substat is perfect on her. Plus, her passive talent raises the chance of the crits by 20%. I'll show you an example. Let us look on my crit rate. It is 45%. So let's say that every second attack should be a crit. But since we are talking about charge shots, they become crits automatically if they are shot at the weak spots. But the bloom will not necessarily crit, but the subsequent bloom has 20% more chance, so 65% in general. So a second bloom always crits in my case, if the first one hasn't, which in my case is pretty rare. As an example, I got really lucky that my first 3 artifacts got bonus crit damage. On 2, they were even upgraded upwards till 17% and 14%, which is an enormous boost to Ganyu's kit, since for her, everything revolves around crit damage. The other 2 goblets and circlet have mostly terrible stats, only attack bonus substat is good from the substats that they have. Currently I'm working on getting artifacts that have good stats for these last 2 too. But even without these 2 being perfect, I still do a lot of damage, and most of my shots are crits. For the set, I personally recommend the Blizzard Strayer one, since it also gives you an extra crit rate. I personally went with the Viridescent Hunt Bow, since it gives crit rate as a substat, but the Slingshot Bow could also be very powerful, since it also gives bonus crit rate, and the passive effect is better too, if you get up close and personal. Plus, you will have an easier time getting headshots. The only downside is the default damage that this weapon deals. It is significantly lower than the first one. The other far better weapon could be the Skyward Harp, but good luck getting it. If you got this weapon and Ganyu, then she will become unstoppable in the end. One of the main reasons being the passive bonus crit damage that it gives. The weapon Alley Hunter could be good too, because of its crit rate and passive too, but if you could not get any of these weapons, you still could get the broken build for Ganyu. There are also bows that increase the crit damage. If you go with this kind of bow, then you just have to switch the last artifact, the circlet, with the crit rate one, and boom, should have approximately same overall stats as my Ganyu. You can even leave the crit damage circlet if you get enough crit rates as substats. This is generally the case for my Ningguang, but in the end I changed the last artifact with the crit rate one in her case. The important advice I can give is mix and match. There isn't only one build for the characters. You can switch most of the items in most of the builds. The important thing is to have the same stats in the end. For Ganyu, the important stat is crit damage and crit rate. In fights, you generally only use the level 2 charge shot. The elemental skill can be used to attract the attention of the enemies. If you have Mona, you can use her skill too for the attraction and cause freeze in the process, which will increase your crit rate even more. When you use the elemental burst, make sure to stay inside the field to increase your damage, if it's safe to do so. For the team, I go with Mona, Fischl, Shishi or Children, but since the chances to get the 5-star characters are low, go with the Fischl, Chongyun, if you have him, otherwise Kea and Shanling. For the healing, Barbara should suffice too, plus she can also apply the wet status effect and make the enemies vulnerable to freeze. Diona is also a good choice, and Shinkyu is a very good and probably one of the best choices. I will work on him after I level up my Sucrosin, which takes time sadly. My current team for Ganyu looks like this: Barbara, Ganyu, of course, Chongyun and Ningguang for the insurance, and even without her, this team is pretty strong. And I'll tell you why. Barbara is for the healing and to occasionally freeze enemies. My Chongyun is pretty weak since I haven't upgraded his artifacts, but he's in this team only for the elemental resonance, which gives Ganyu extra 15% crit chance on her subsequent shots on the same enemies or on the ones who are affected by cryo. Since I went for the frozen set on her, she also gets plus 20% crit rate on the enemies who are affected by cryo and plus 20% on the frozen enemies. On top of that, she also gets plus 20% crit rate on her subsequent shot on any enemy from her passive talent. Now let us add those numbers up. 65% crit rate. My Ganyu has 45% crit rate without these effects, which means that now she has 100% crit chance. So every level 2 charge shot will crit, especially blooms for at least 13 to 15,000 cryo damage, plus the normal arrow for 6,000 to 7,500 cryo damage. Overall, more than 20,000 cryo damage per fired shot, if you don't miss. This much damage can only be amplified more by the 5-star weapon Skyward Harp, since it gives extra crit damage no matter what. Is this broken? Well, yes. And that's the whole point. Break the game by overpowered waifus. And this much is achievable without spending much on the game, if you take the 5-star weapon out. Do you need more constellations of Ganyu? No. Definitely not. Most of the enemies on the world map die from one shot or live with only a glimmer of life. Most bosses die fast too. Most of the domains are cleared in 1.5 minutes at least, and that is a bad time since I was even able to clear them in under a minute if I tried hard. You don't need more than 20,000 damage currently, and on higher world levels, you just have to use other party members too. Currently, I'm only using Ganyu for the most of the stuff, and I'm winning without any problems. Before I end the video, I'll give you a quick tip for the domain Taishan Mansion. Use the following team comp here: Ganyu, Barbara, Chongyun, and Ningun. Pretty much my team. And it is irrelevant if everyone except Ganyu is weak. You will have an easier time. And generally, that was it for the DPS Ganyu build. You can also use her as a support, but it would just be a shame and make me very, very sad. Please don't do that. If you like what you see, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing, which will make me happy. Anyway, stay frosty and most importantly, break the game with overpowered waifus. Till next time, farewell.